Imagine waking up one morning in a country you thought was stable, only to hear fighter jets screaming overhead, tanks rolling through the streets, and the presidential palace engulfed in flames. Your elected leader is dead, and a stern-faced general you've barely heard of has just seized control, declaring martial law and vowing to purge the nation of its enemies. This wasn't a scene from a Hollywood thriller. This was Chile on 11th September 1973, the day Augusto Pinochet Ugarte began his transformation from a career soldier into one of Latin America's most ruthless dictators. For the next 17 years, Chile would live under his iron grip, a regime marked by economic upheaval, widespread terror, disappearances, and a controversial legacy that still divides the nation today. How did a seemingly unremarkable army officer from the ranks rise to become the supreme ruler who reshaped Chile forever? Today, we dive deep into the life of Augusto Pinochet, from his modest beginnings to his bloody ascent, the height of his power and its dark controversies, and the lessons his rule leaves for the world. Stick around, because this story is as gripping as it is harrowing. Born on 25 November 1915, in the bustling port city of Valparaíso, Chile, Augusto José Ramón Pinochet Ugarte entered the world as the eldest of 6 children in a modest middle-class family. His father, also named Augusto, worked as a customs official at the harbor, putting in long hours that kept him somewhat distant from the family. His mother, Avelina Ugarte, was the dominant figure in young Augusto's life, a doting yet strict homemaker who favored him and instilled in him a sense of discipline and ambition. Valparaíso, with its steep hills, colorful houses, and constant flow of ships from around the world, provided a vibrant backdrop to his early years, but Pinochet's childhood was far from idyllic. He was known as something of a bully among neighborhood kids, enjoying military games, boxing, and intimidating his siblings and playmates. Academically, he was unexceptional. He struggled in local Roman Catholic schools, and even dropped out around age 14. Yet, there was one calling that fascinated him from a young age, the military. He repeatedly applied to Chile's prestigious military academy until he was finally accepted in 1931 or 1932, entering the Escuela Militar General Bernardo O'Higgins in Santiago. This decision would set the course for his entire life. Graduating in 1936 as a second lieutenant in the infantry, Pinochet embarked on a slow, steady climb through the ranks of the Chilean army. Unlike many Latin American strongmen who rose through battlefield glory or flashy charisma, Pinochet was a bureaucrat's soldier. He saw no combat in his early career. Instead, he served in various provincial garrisons, taught at military academies, and gradually built a reputation as a reliable, loyal officer with a keen interest in geopolitics and anti-communism. In the 1950s, he even commanded a detention camp holding suspected communists, an experience that may have hardened his views. Promotions came methodically. By the early 1970s, after decades of service, he had reached high ranks, including postings in Ecuador and roles in military intelligence and training. He was seen as professional, somewhat aloof, and politically cautious, a man who kept his ambitions carefully hidden. Chile in the late 1960s and early 1970s was a country in turmoil. A vibrant democracy with a long tradition of civilian rule, it was nonetheless polarized by economic woes, social inequality, and Cold War tensions. Salvador Allende, a socialist, won the presidency in 1970 as the candidate of the Popular Unity Coalition, promising radical reforms, nationalization of industries, land redistribution, and closer ties with Cuba and the Soviet Union. For many in the middle class, the military, and the United States, this was a nightmare scenario, a potential slide into communism. Strikes, shortages, hyperinflation, and political violence escalated. Allende's government faced opposition from Congress, the courts, and growing segments of society. Pinochet, appointed Army Chief of Staff in early 1972 and then Commander-in-Chief on 23 August 1973, by Allende himself, who trusted his apparent loyalty, positioned himself at the center of events. Behind the scenes, plans for a coup were brewing among hardline officers. On the morning of 11 September 1973, the military struck. Fighter jets bombed La Moneda, the presidential palace in Santiago. Allende, refusing to surrender, reportedly took his own life as troops closed in. Pinochet emerged as the leader of the foreman junta that took control. In his first public statements, he portrayed the coup as a necessary salvation from Marxist chaos, promising order, stability, and a return to true Chilean values. What followed was anything but temporary. In the immediate aftermath, the regime unleashed a wave of repression. Thousands were rounded up: activists, union leaders, students, intellectuals, and suspected leftists. The National Stadium in Santiago became a massive makeshift prison and interrogation center. Summary executions, torture, and secret detentions became commonplace. Pinochet quickly consolidated power. By 1974, he had assumed the title of president, sidelining other junta members. He dissolved Congress, banned political parties and trade unions, imposed strict censorship, and declared a state of siege. The secret police, DINA under Manuel Contreras, became the regime's feared enforcement arm, operating with impunity. Pinochet's rise was fueled by a mix of calculation, opportunity, and ideology. He had navigated the ranks carefully, avoiding early political entanglements while cultivating alliances with anti-Allende factions. His staunch anti-communism, shaped by decades of military indoctrination and Cold War fears, provided the justification for his actions. Supporters at home and abroad, including elements in the US government wary of Soviet influence in Latin America, saw him as a bulwark. But for opponents, he was a traitor who destroyed Chile's democracy. His struggles weren't those of a revolutionary firebrand, but of a patient climber who seized the moment when Chile's institutions fractured under pressure. At its peak, Pinochet's rule embodied ruthless authoritarianism wrapped in a vision of national renewal. He centralized authority to an extraordinary degree, becoming not just head of state but commander-in-chief for life and, later, a senator for life under the constitution his regime crafted. Economically, the regime pivoted sharply. Rejecting Allende's socialism, Pinochet's government embraced free market reforms influenced by the Chicago Boys. Economists trained at the University of Chicago under Milton Friedman. They slashed tariffs, privatized state enterprises, deregulated markets, stabilized the currency, and opened Chile to foreign investment. Inflation was tamed, growth accelerated in later years, and Chile began its transformation into Latin America's most market-oriented economy. Poverty eventually declined, and the country laid foundations for long-term prosperity that many credit to these policies. Yet this economic miracle came at an unbearable human cost. The regime's security forces systematically targeted perceived enemies. According to official commissions like the Rettig and Valek reports, around 3,000 people were killed or disappeared, with tens of thousands more tortured. Estimates put political prisoners and torture victims at over 30,000 to 40,000. Methods were brutal. Electric shocks, waterboarding, sexual violence, beatings, and psychological terror in clandestine centers like Villa Grimaldi. Bodies were dumped in mass graves, thrown into the sea, or buried in remote deserts. Families searched in vain for loved ones, many of whom remain missing to this day. Internationally, Pinochet's Chile collaborated in Operation Condor, a dark alliance with other southern cone dictatorships in Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and beyond. Coordinated intelligence operations led to assassinations and abductions of exiles across borders and even in Europe and the United States. High-profile cases included the 1976 car bomb killing of former Chilean diplomat Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C. Dissent was crushed at home through raids, censorship, and exile. Protests were met with force, and fear permeated daily life. Pinochet himself cultivated a cult of personality, appearing in uniform, delivering stern speeches, and projecting unyielding strength. He survived multiple assassination attempts, including a notable one in 1986, which only hardened his resolve. Controversies swirled around every aspect of his rule. While economic liberals praised the reforms that turned Chile into a success story by regional standards, critics argued the benefits were uneven, with inequality persisting and workers suffering under suppressed unions. Human rights abuses drew global condemnation. Amnesty International and others documented the horrors extensively. The regime's 1978 amnesty law shielded perpetrators, but it couldn't erase the scars. Pinochet's personal finances later came under scrutiny, with revelations of secret accounts and corruption tainting his image further. Supporters claimed the repression was necessary to prevent civil war or communist takeover. Detractors saw it as state terrorism pure and simple. By the late 1980s, pressure mounted. Economic crisis in the early 1980s sparked protests. International isolation grew. A 1988 plebiscite on extending his rule failed, paving the way for a return to democracy. Pinochet handed over the presidency in 1990 to elected civilian Patricio Aylwin, but he retained command of the army until 1998 and secured immunity as a senator for life under the 1980 constitution. His exit was peaceful by dictatorship standards, yet the transition was tense, with the military still influential. Pinochet's legacy is profoundly divided, a mirror to Chile's own polarized soul. To some, he is the savior who rescued Chile from socialism, stabilized its economy, and set it on the path to becoming the most prosperous and stable country in Latin America, with strong institutions, low corruption by regional measures, and sustained growth. His supporters point to modern Chile's skyscrapers, export economy, and democratic continuity as proof of his vision. To others, and to the thousands of victims and their families, he remains a symbol of brutality, the man who betrayed democracy, murdered and tortured his compatriots, and enriched himself and his allies while terrorizing a nation. His rule left deep wounds, trauma in families, distrust in institutions, and ongoing debates over memory, justice, and reconciliation. After stepping down, accountability finally loomed. Arrested in London in 1998 on a Spanish warrant for human rights violations, his case became a landmark in international justice, testing universal jurisdiction. Though he returned to Chile on health grounds and avoided full conviction due to age and claimed ailments, he faced multiple investigations until his death on 10 December 2006 at age 91. He died without a final legal reckoning for his crimes, but his arrest galvanized Chilean courts and society to confront the past more openly. Today, memorials, museums, and truth commissions keep the memory alive, while debates rage over statues, streets named after him, and the balance between economic achievements and moral failures. What lessons does Augusto Pinochet's rule offer us? First, the fragility of democracy. Even in stable nations, economic crisis and polarization can create openings for authoritarians who promise order. Second, the seductive yet dangerous allure of ends justify the means thinking. Economic success cannot excuse systematic human rights abuses. Third, the power of memory and justice. Nations must confront dark chapters honestly to heal. Pinochet rose from the ranks not through brilliance but through timing, loyalty to his worldview, and the willingness to wield unchecked power. His story warns that ordinary soldiers or officials, given the right circumstances, can become tyrants. It also shows resilience. Chile emerged from dictatorship with a stronger commitment to democracy, proving that even the most ruthless regimes eventually yield to the people's will. As we close this chapter, remember that history isn't just dates and names, it's the lived experiences of millions. Augusto Pinochet's Chile was a nation torn between fear and progress, terror and transformation. Understanding his journey helps us guard against future abuses of power, wherever they may arise. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Was Pinochet a necessary evil or an unforgivable dictator? Let me know below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.